Hello and welcome to this edition of Fulton Justice. I'm your host, Yolanda Lewis, District Court Administrator for the Atlanta Judicial Circuit. Thank you for joining us today. There's a grave misconception in the United States that human trafficking is a trend that is relegated to foreign soil. The misconception may be attributed to a number of sources, but the issue usually has an international undertone that escapes progressive metropolitan landscapes such as Atlanta. The painful truth is that human trafficking is one of the world's fastest growing criminal industries, and Atlanta is no exception to the rule. According to recent data, our city is now a major transportation hub for trafficking young women and one of 14 U.S. cities with the highest level of sex trafficking of children. Each month, approximately 300 to 500 girls are commercially sexually exploited throughout the state. In fact, statistics show that on average, 100 juvenile girls are exploited each night, not in large populous states like California or Texas, but right here in Georgia. At a recent presentation at Clark Atlanta University, former President Jimmy Carter declared human trafficking as the worst and most pervasive and unaddressed human rights violation on earth. Although hard to believe, Atlanta has one of the largest cash-based sex economies, boasting totals of more than $290 million a year, a total that is higher than the illegal drug and gun trade combined. While the stats are hard to believe, there is good work being done to combat this issue. The justice system, the executive branch, and a multitude of nonprofit organizations across the state are mobilizing to develop comprehensive strategies to identify and prosecute perpetrators and to assist victims of crime. Youth Spark, an organization that provides help to juveniles at risk of being afflicted by this issue, is one of the premier organizations leading the charge right here in Fulton County. Stay with us. You don't want to miss this insightful discussion about human trafficking. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Fulton Justice. Today we're here with Executive Director of Youth Spark, Jennifer Swain. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're going to talk a little bit about Youth Spark because you're doing some amazing work, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the whole concept of human trafficking in Atlanta and in Georgia. I remember seeing you present at a recent panel, and I thought to myself, I had no clue how big this issue was. So can you kind of set the stage for us before we start talking about your program in general?
Absolutely, and I just really want to start by thanking you guys for using your platform, because this is exactly the way that more people are going to hear about this, and so I appreciate you using the Each One Reach One model and having me here today. But one of the main things that when we talk about human trafficking, that word is such a strong word. And right now it has become so sexy and so sensationalized that you really don't understand sometimes exactly what that means.
Right.
There's a lot of terms out here. You hear human trafficking, commercial sexual exploitation, child sex trafficking, sexual slavery. It can be quite overwhelming.
Right.
But at the core, what it is that anytime sexual abuse is accompanied by remuneration in cash or in kind to a person, and more specifically, our case, a child, or to a third party, then it is exploitation. And trafficking happens in every single culture, in every single community.
Right.
It just looks differently.
Right. I was reading a statistic soon after I saw your presentation, and it said that Atlanta was the #1 hub for human trafficking. So you're going to have to really kind of talk us through that. I mean, that's not something that you want to think of when you think of Atlanta.
Absolutely not, and I'm so glad you said that, because so many people believe that Atlanta's #1. I've heard that stat every time I go somewhere, and people say, I heard Atlanta's #1 in the world, and while people often look to Georgia and look to Atlanta for a lot of bad reasons, we are not #1. And so statistics are absolutely important when you're raising awareness, and language is absolutely key when you're talking about this issue. There's only one statistic out here that gives an order of states, and that was done by the FBI in 2005. And it basically released a study on the the 14 cities with the highest incidence of prostitution involving children. And Atlanta is number one because that list is in alphabetical order.
Okay.
But I do believe that whether we are number one or whether we're number 13 or whether we're number 33, it is really all of our responsibility to make sure that we create a world where children are not bought and sold for sex.
And I will say most of the time when you hear the concept of human trafficking, the sex trade, you automatically think of a woman. And then secondly, you think of a foreign country. So both of those are myths.
Well, let's just talk about human trafficking because I think that is a term that people can put a nice bow on it.
Right.
I mean, but let's talk about prostitution. And when you hear the word prostitute, what do you think of?
It's never positive.
And you probably don't want to say some of those words on television because that's
Right.
not good. But when
Right.
you hear that word prostitute, you tend to think of an adult person who's making a decision to do something.
Right.
What we know is that the average age of entry into prostitution is 12 to 14 years old.
Wow.
So even for those women that we see caught up in this lifestyle or those adults that we see caught up, if you understand the continuum of abuse, they were probably introduced when they were just 12 to 14 years old. So I think what we have to recognize is that the language and the terms can absolutely make you wonder what exactly it is and make it hard for you to get your mind around it. But when you hear human trafficking, that talks about sexual servitude and labor trafficking.
Okay.
It talks about adults and minors. It talks about international and domestic. And one of the key facts that I recognize is that if a child or a person is bought here from another country, and sold for the purposes of sex, Immigration's Customs Enforcement, our federal government will step in. They will treat that person or that child like a victim. But when that child grew up in College Park, or when that child grew up right down the street in the West End or on Peachtree, then for some reason they look at her as she's just a whore. She just wants to be a part of this lifestyle. And we have to recognize that domestic minor sex trafficking is very different than international human trafficking, but it's just a matter of what you're specifically talking about.
And one of the things I do want to make sure that we address is that, we've talked about the female concept of this issue, but there are males who are involved in the same way.
Absolutely.
Right.
And there's not, we say girl a lot, and girls, because we know that's the research that we have.
Right.
And when we first started this journey through the Fulton County Juvenile Court under Judge Nina Hickson, she saw an influx of young girls who were 12, 13, 14 years old coming through her court, and they were arrested, charged, and treated like a criminal. While the adults who bought and sold her typically walked away with a $50 fine, and the man who purchased her typically didn't get arrested at all.
Right.
And so I think one of the things that we can really recognize is as we learn more about this journey, we recognize more gaps. And the one thing that we know today is that it's happening to boys, and we have to do a better job of getting the numbers and the education on what it looks like, and we're doing that research.
So we could talk about the issue for days because there's so much to talk about, but I do want to talk about your program. Tell me a little bit about Youth Spark.
Well, Youth Spark was really born out of the Fulton County Juvenile Court because there were leaders who got together, such as Nina Hickson and Deborah Richardson, and they really saw the young girls and the need coming through. So we were born in the early 2000s as Juvenile Justice Fund, and we owned and operated the first safe house for girls called Angela's House. That home no longer exists, but we do have some of the best services here in our state for girls who are being exploited and working on ways to reach boys. Our journey started out with rescue and court advocacy, and in around 2007 we quickly moved into court advocacy and education at the community level. Most people just did not know that these girls were victims.
Right.
They did not recognize that these girls were not adults.
Right.
And they did not recognize the myriad of trauma and other issues facing that child. And so we have changed over the years, and we've worked through legislation. We've come through research. We've even done research on the demand side of the problem. And today we're all about early intervention and prevention, and we're really grateful to be able to reach girls earlier.
Talk a little bit about, I know that you all have done so many campaigns to really kind of put this issue out in front of citizens, and there was a really good discussion about what people can do to really get involved with this issue. So I want to talk about some of the campaigns that you've put in place, and then how people have responded to those.
Well, one of the biggest one that's still living and breathing today is A Future Not a Past. The A Future Not a Past campaign was created really to be a voice for the kids, not to necessarily touch them. But one of the things of that is there's so many things as regular community members that we can all do, because you have to start with the youth in your life. And if you don't know it's a problem, when it's time for those laws to be on the books to protect those kids, your votes, your call to your representative and to your legislator, that makes a world of a difference. And that is something that you can always do. We want to encourage parents on how to start the conversation earlier.
Right.
And not wait, because again, you can't go through the school system and talk about this. You can't even talk about regular sex in a way that's not, in a way that doesn't kind of scare everybody and it's very taboo. But we're committed to creating teen-friendly materials because the teens are talking about it.
Right.
And we want to make sure that we provide the safe space for them to learn about it. But at the same time, we have to make sure that everybody is aware, because you could encounter someone who's a victim and just never know it.
And I think one of the things is very important is that you're working with legislative teams to make sure that we address this from the perspective of the laws that are put in place, correct?
Absolutely. We started out just to really, the number one thing that we recognize is that when you talk about reportable form of sexual abuse, the commercial sexual exploitation of children was not included in that definition until 2008. And that was based on our efforts of Senate Bill 69. When that was passed, it really focused on the fact that sexual abuse should be reported by all mandatory reporters, but it should also include the third party, which could be the pimp.
And does that include school? I mean, does that apply to mandatory reporters? Who are those people?
Absolutely. Mandatory reporters are anybody who's on the front line with children, especially schools, the medical professionals, those in juvenile courts. Those are all the true frontline responders, and it's been our job to make sure that they know that there have been these changes in the law. We also organize an annual day at the Capitol called DMST Lobby Day, and it typically happens within the first or second week of February. And that's a great way to stay involved, stay plugged into what's actually going on and the best way to use your voice.
Right. This has been wonderful information, and we're going to, when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the ways that people can get involved with what you're doing. We'll be right back with Jennifer Swain. Thank you. Welcome back. We're here with Jennifer Swain with Youth Spark to continue discussing the issue of human trafficking. Jennifer, thank you again for being here. I wanted to talk a little bit about how citizens can get involved. I know you did a wonderful presentation about knowing the signs and then what you can do once you recognize the signs. So tell us a little bit about how people can get involved and help with this issue that way.
Well, I'd love to be able to say and give you a checklist of all the things that you could look for, and if you see any of those things, then you have a victim. But one of the things that we've been able to do is to teach all the mandatory reporters, which are those on the front lines, like teachers, the medical professionals, those within the juvenile court system, teach them basically some of the key red flags, which may be truancy. If a child's not in school consistently, if there's a high runaway history at home, a history of abuse, sexual abuse, those are some warning signs that may indicate that there needs to be more attention placed on that child. But the number one thing that you can do is get educated, know the signs, but also as regular community members, you don't have to go out there and try to rescue a girl. Law enforcement has that part covered.
Because that could be dangerous.
For you and for the girl.
That's right.
And you have to recognize, if you walk up to a girl and say, I learned about human trafficking, I think you're a victim, come on and go with me, you're probably going to scare her. And she's not going to identify as many victims do. They don't self-identify as a victim. So there's lots of ways to plug in and get involved. But one of the really good things is to know how to report suspicious behavior. If you see it in your community, learn your local tip line. The metro area's local tip line is 404-577-TIPS, TIPS. And you can call and make an anonymous tip. And don't forget that your language is very important. You know, if you say a victim of trafficking, that person will be perceived very differently.
And speaking of being perceived very differently, the way these matters are handled in the courts, in juvenile court, is it different?
Absolutely. We've seen a growth of how we respond faster and how we intervene earlier. We are very proud to be based at the Fulton County Juvenile Court today, and we really rely heavily on our partnership with the court and with the probation department so that when girls come through the system,
Right.
and even boys today,
Right.
they come
Right.
through the system, they are well prepared to intervene earlier. And even if that child does not admit having a pimp, or does not identify as a victim, they can then refer her to programs such as Youth Spark Voices for them to be able to get the education and the clinical help that they need.
So let's talk about some of the events and programs, of course, that people can reach you about and get involved in. You have an ambassadors program, and what other events are you having or hosting as people try to get involved with this issue?
Well, if you sign up for our mailing list at youth-spark.org, you'll get notifications. And once a quarter, we have community ambassador trainings. It really is an opportunity that's designed for any community member, no matter where you are in your life. We do have teen ambassadors as well. That program looks a lot different than the adult program, but we really want to give you everything you need to know about trafficking 101 to go out and raise awareness within your own community. And if you sign up on our mailing list, we also send out volunteer opportunities. We need toiletry drives. We ask for fast food gift cards. There's a lot of ways that you can kind of plug in to provide the needs of the girls in our program. But we really want to make sure that every community is educated, and that's why we have ambassadors.
And so there's legislation, a lot of things happening, not only on the ground, but a lot of things that are happening at the Capitol where you're trying to address this issue. Talk a little bit about the future of this issue in our state and in Metro Atlanta.
Well, the great thing about it is that legislators are elected by the people. And many legislators say that if they hear from 5 people in their district on a problem, then they will move to action because 5 people is a lot. But most people don't make that call. They don't send that email because they think it doesn't matter. But it absolutely does. And I think one of the reasons why we've been able to change and fill so many of the gaps in the laws is because we have a great group of people who are willing to answer that call and also show up at the Capitol every year in February for DMST Lobby Day, where you can really lift up your voice. So I think that is one of the major things that you can do is stay plugged in. Every week while we're in session, if you're signed up on our mailing list, you will receive a legislative advocacy alert that will tell you whatever bills that we are following and will also provide any other action steps. And Shared Hope International, they have what we call a Protected Innocence Challenge, and it's actually a report card.
Wow.
They grade all the states on the laws. Right now, Georgia has a B, and we really want to go for the A in the 2015 session.
But a B is not, it's good.
But a B is not an A.
B is not an A.
Right.
So let's just talk about, I know we mentioned schools. I do want to go back just really quickly to how you're working with schools. I know we talked about this issue still being a bit taboo in the context of the educational system. How are you working to address that barrier?
Well, schools is really twofold. One of our partners, Street Grace, they actually host and maintain a portal that is on the Georgia Department of Education's website, and that is information where all teachers have to go and get training on the signs and how to report this. That's one great new tool that we have available for the school system. But secondly, it's about reaching our kids. I really believe that if we can reach them before the trafficker does, before that pimp does, and begin to tell them how beautiful they are and begin to lure them into a lifestyle that they're not expecting, then we can make a difference.
Right.
Most schools have a tough time talking about sex in general. So we really understand how hard it could be to talk about sex with adults for money. And what we're committed to doing is providing ways, teen-friendly material that is not sexually overt in nature that schools can feel comfortable using. One of the great things that we have through Youth Spark Igniters, they are school groups, they're teen groups. We do have some public schools involved, but we have a lot of private schools involved. And it's not because I called the school and said, let me talk to your kids. It's because the kids have said, we want to do a topic on this. We want to form a club. So the youth voice is very powerful.
And they're responding on their own.
Absolutely. And they open the door for us. So that makes it a lot easier that the kids are now becoming involved, because we really believe that if we start with them at 11 and 12, when they become 19, 20, 21 years old, they will be less likely, number one, to fall prey to a victim, but they'll be less likely to be a perpetrator or a person who purchases someone else.
Give me one of your success stories, because I think you probably have a lot of people that you've touched, but just in general, tell us what success looks like.
Well, for us, I think success looks very different.
Mm-hmm.
There are girls that come into our program, Youth Spark Voices, and they have run away from home more than 50 times. Mm-hmm. There are girls that come through the program and they have a history of sexual abuse, and they really don't think that anybody truly understands. Mm-hmm. When a child picks up the phone and calls me, or they call one of our staff, or they text and they say, I'm getting ready to leave, but they don't, that is success. Mm-hmm. Just this year, we intervened with a child who was referred through the program, and when she started in, she had a 25-year-old boyfriend. She thought he loved her. Mm-hmm. After participating in our group for about 8 weeks, mm-hmm. she began to hear the other girls, and she finally got up enough courage to say, I'm embarrassed, wow. but my boyfriend is making me do these things. Within about a 4-week period, we worked with Georgia Cares, which is a statewide system of care for victims. Mm-hmm. We paired that child with services, and in January, she graduated from that program, and she's now moved out of state, and she's in Job Corps. That is success.
Right. You not only touch someone's lives, but you change it.
And that child is going to be the best ambassador ever, mm-hmm. because she can definitely say, I know what you are going through. And that's the best voice.
Jennifer, you are doing wonderful work. We are so proud of all of the accomplishments of Youth Spark. More importantly, we're glad it's here in Fulton County. And I know that you're having an impact here, but you're having a national impact too, and I think that that's important.
Thank you so much. We appreciate Fulton County.
So if people want to find out more information about your organization, tell us where we can find the information.
You can go to www.youth-spark.org. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate it.
When we return, we'll have our final thoughts regarding today's discussion. Human trafficking crime painfully reminds us that modern-day slavery is occurring in communities all across the country. There's a grave misconception that human trafficking is simply a foreign soil issue. The painful truth is that 85% of confirmed sex trafficking victims are U.S. citizens, mostly runaway children. With justice systems, community, and government organizations working together, we have an unprecedented opportunity to bring awareness to this issue. With persistence, our collective efforts will serve as a beacon of hope for victims seeking a safe place to turn. For more information about Youth Spark and human trafficking, please visit www.youth-spark.org or call 404-612-4628. Special thanks to our guests today, and thank you for joining us for this edition of Fulton Justice.